Are you ready for the future? No, not today, but maybe tomorrow, the next day, and for the rest of your lives. Actually, what I'm talking about is the future of the television show. We here at the Future Laboratories work our digitals to the bone to bring you the best stories about art and technology. Nigel, what do you got?
I've got a new piece on hypertext fiction. It's a new kind of writing using computers to allow the reader to decide how the story will be read. I talked to some leading hypertext fiction writers, as well as a guy who's very critical of this.
Okay. Clifton.
Just a moment. I'm on the phone, son. I'll be right there. You might remember Brenda Law was the digital renegade. She's involved in virtual reality. She did the whole thing called the Placeholder Project of Bounce. And we're profiling her. She's got different ideas on stuff. She talks about women in technology and how the technology has changed, the collaborative nature of the technology has changed the way the artist is.
Right. Nigel, second story.
Oh yeah, I got a piece on telepresence. It's a new medium that allows you, the viewer, to experience artificially created virtual reality type environments, as well as real places where you can't go, like the bottom of the ocean or the inside of the human body. And of course, in this piece, we're looking at how it may apply to the arts.
Right. All right. Stand by for the future.
Hypertext fiction is an attempt on the part of creative writers using hypertext technology to break open the bounds of the linear traditional novel. In hypertext fiction, the reader moves by a series of associative links from one node to another, and a node is any discrete area of text. It may also contain graphics or sound or potentially even video. It breaks open those bounds of the linear book then in the sense that you will proceed through diverse paths. You don't proceed from page 1 sequentially through to the page 295. Rather, a hypertext fiction is an unbounded form, a polyvalent space, which allows the reader to produce his own reading, his own navigation paths, and to take on the role of interpretation in a more articulate fashion than the traditional linear novel.
The shift away from the author as authority is something that's pretty old in 20th century literature. It's not that this medium came along and suddenly made it possible to shift toward a reader-based fiction or a reader-based art. Rather, it's been a longing among artists throughout the 20th century. The story starts to form according to the choices that you make and according to the way that you look at the story. So what really happens on screen is that you click on certain words. The term that I suggest is words that have texture, and those words give way. The screen gives way to another screen, which begins to follow the areas that you develop. And in that way, you sort of shape the text almost tactily and physically as you do so. I do public readings of afternoons sometimes where we project the story on the screen, and I read whatever comes up, let the audience make choices. And I'm always surprised by the shape that the story takes. I mean, there are certain fundamental parts of it that will show up in a given reading. There's a screen that says, I may have seen my son die this morning. That very often shows up. Sometimes doesn't, though. It's a story of at least 3 women and at least 2 men, some of whom are involved with one another. One of whom may have seen an accident involving his ex-wife and son. But really, I mean, not to be precious about it, the story does form itself in different ways.
In hypertext fiction, a lot of the autonomy of the author, the fact that the author was there to fix the text into one pattern, a lot of that is taken away, it's given up, it's moved over to the reader. In some systems, in some hypertexts, the reader is now able to create their own storyline, which they can do many times. Every time they approach the book, they can recreate it, using the words the author put there, but putting them in different orders, discarding some, and so on. So the roles of the author and the reader move together and start to blur.
What I don't like about hypertext fiction is that it seems to be based upon a false premise. I mean, it's based upon this idea that the audience or the reader in making choices is somehow A, contributing to the art, and B, this level of participation makes for more significant art. In other words, that it's some evolutionary leap where the writer who has reigned triumphant for the last since Homer or whatever is replaced or has to suddenly become a duo. There's no more solo acts in the hypertext universe.
The important part of what it takes to be a hypertext writer is to let your imagination open to the multiplicity and to understand that you're ceding your place to the reader, that eventually the text will be shaped between you and will be shaped by multiple readers. One thing we haven't talked about so far is that more and more texts are literally being opened up so the reader can rewrite your words. You may never see them again, or you may never see them in the form that they were before. So there's a trade-off of that traditional satisfaction of the artist for the new satisfactions of being able to represent multiplicity and being able to engage much more directly with the reader.
Well, I think the history of reading is a history of interaction. I think I certainly, when I read a book, am involved in a discourse or a dialogue with the author. I constantly, am underlining things, writing notes in the margins, and on a few occasions, like reading John Gardner, throwing him into the fire. But so I think that discourse or dialogue has gone on. And that is that's the interaction that the audience or the reader wants. I don't think that they want an incomplete book, which is sort of fill in the blanks. They want to know that somebody thought these things through, developed a point of view, and is taking them down the path. I think we want to escape is part of the essence of literature, or if not to escape, certainly to explore other worlds, other points of view. And the question I ask is, how can we do that when the hypertext is constantly forcing us to leap out of the text and to make a new choice, to follow a new pathway?
It feels to me, as a woman writing hypertext, that it's a field that's owned by men. And in fact, when you hear quotes, citations and such, they're almost exclusively by the men who are writing hypertext. It's important to me to try to find opportunities and perhaps create opportunities for more women to become involved, because I really believe that hypertext is an environment that is particularly suited to women's cultural perspective. The sense of impulse to collaboration, of toleration of multiple voices, of ambiguities, various aspects of it fit very, very well with the way women exist in the world and their subcultural status.
The idea of writing a book straight out, again, where you had a plot and would want to then conceive of it as having a resolution and a final denouement, those ideas have to be put aside, and instead the writer has to begin to think in different kinds of paradigms, structural paradigms, to begin to think of the different paths that might read from this particular set of text to another. Those are the new tasks of the hypertext author.
We're at the early stages of hypertext, and it's not that sophisticated now that the artist can lose control. But I do think that everybody's having this sort of wet dream fantasy that all of these choices are inherently good. But I feel that what's happening is that, it leads to a hell of a lot of filler, where you have to, suddenly you say, well, we have to create all of these pathways, and the narrative itself might not bear up to that, I mean, not every poem turns into an epic, Sometimes you just write a short story and not War and Peace. So hypertext says, that we have to build in all these options so that there's all these choices for people to have. And I think, you end up with a lot of dreck.
Hypertext fiction can't revolutionize literature in so much as literature has always had a counter-tradition of nonlinearity. It has always had those texts that have tried to break beyond normal sequential readings. What hypertext fiction can do, on the other hand, is allow that other tradition to come into its own in a way it wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that as we move into the world of the electronic sign, into a world in which digital reading becomes part and parcel of our everyday experience, hypertext may become one of the most important ways by which we access not only fiction, but all information.
The remark that I'm fond of is that hypertext is the revenge of the word on television. What I mean by that is that with hypermedia, the image assumes its place in the system of text, and meanwhile the word assumes its place in the universe of the visual and the sensual. And so hypertext and virtual reality and these new media are inevitably shifting our notion of what literature is, our notion of what all the arts are.
The function of the writer is to, you know, as Faulkner said, we must kill all our children. And, you know, you do draft after draft after draft and throw out most of the stuff. The writer very often doesn't discover his novel until, you know, he's written 300 or 400 pages of it, and then, you know, sort of he or she says, but, oh, you know, sorry, it's not, you know, Monsieur Bovary, it's Madame Bovary. I got the wrong point of view here, you know. Well, in the hypertext world, you would include both. And, you know, everybody would say, isn't that wonderful, because everything is relative and all points of view are equal. And, you know, I don't know. I find it all very depressing.
I'd like to revolutionize the world completely. I don't care that much about revolutionizing literature, I suppose. I want to see more people believe in their own creativity and their own authority in the world, and less dependent on given authority. And if hypertext can contribute to that effect, I think it probably does. There is something revolutionary about it. I guess it's some kind of weird compliment when people say, oh, I'm so sick of hearing about Brenda Laurel, she's such a token. I've spent 15 years in the computer game business, duking it out with the shoot-'em-up crowd,
Nick, are you
and I feel like I've earned my stripes. I've had an interesting past, and I guess many of us are sort of renegades. I'm proud to say I've been fired from every job I've ever had in Silicon Valley, fired from Atari twice, actually, which is some kind of record, I think, for being in everybody's face about gender and about violence and about freedom and about creativity. But eventually, if you make enough noise for long enough, and especially if you can make some examples of what it is that you're talking about, people begin to take you seriously. I think the reason that you see so few women in the field at this moment in time is because many of us were handicapped in our early education by sexism. I went to high school in the 60s. When I was a junior in high school, I was the only girl in math class, and I knew immediately that I had to make a choice between taking math and having dates for the rest of my life, and I made the obvious choice. So I haven't had math since I was a sophomore in high school. I have always relied on the kindness of strangers to teach me about calculus and trigonometry and all those things. Children in adolescence have a horrible time creating a gender identity for themselves, and the palette that they have to choose from is very narrow, and it's defined by fashion and by style that's put out by a consumerist economy. What we have in virtual reality and in the computer networks that exist is the opportunity for people to construct notions of gender that more truly match who they think they are, to try on notions of gender that aren't necessarily biologically dictated. Well, one thing I've noticed talking in college campuses around the United States and also in other countries, especially Australia, is that the gender balance and the culture balance and among young people who are studying computer science right now is getting much better. I find it really ironic that the feminist community, at least in some quarters, seems to have turned away from its original interest in sexual liberation and in sexual freedom. It's the feminist community who is most vocally opposed to anonymity on computer networks, for instance, because they're not willing to receive sexual comments or sexual representations from people whose true identity they don't know. Well, of course, this immediately puts you back in the box. It puts you back in the closet. And I think it's extremely ironic, and I think that those feminists who have that view ought to really stop and re-examine their politics around it. If you look at the visual style in virtual reality, you're tempted to think that everything has to be smooth and sleek and crispy and gleaming polygons. This is not the case. And it takes a person like me, who doesn't know enough about the machine to be limited by it in a way, to say, I want the world to be fuzzy and ambiguous and messy. We see kids doing that all the time with video. We're beginning to see kids doing that with computers. It's not a question of learning syntax, it's a question of creating it. It turns out that programming computers is not the main event anymore. Knowing how to write assembly language code or C code is not all that's required anymore. But also we're learning that this medium is collaborative, that it takes as many people to do a good virtual environment project as it does to make a feature film. And there are wonderful people out there, men and women, who specialize in the things that I can't do. So I'm able to form alliances with technicians, with technical people, with programmers, with experts in vision and hearing, and we do a pretty good job together. The project in Banff, which we call Placeholders, is the convergence of two research projects. One is work that's been done by Michael Neymark, who is a real pioneer in interactive cinema. He began inventing a technique called virtual relief projection, which allows us to capture a place panoramically with cameras and then project that camera-originated imagery back onto a three-dimensional computer screen, if you will, that is the shape of the landscape itself. It's an amazingly easy and effective way to get 3D. The other line of research that's come to bear here is the work that my partner Rachel Strickland and I have been doing for many years, looking at the nature of play, at how children play with stories, how they make up stories and act out stories together. Because the narratives that are produced are quite nonlinear. They're not like novels, and they're certainly not like adventure games. To make the point about embodiment, we've chosen to create a world where, in order to get around in the world very well, you need to embody yourself as one of the spirit animals that live in the world. So when you become snake, you see as snake, you move as snake, you speak as snake. Kind of a smart costume for you. What we're hoping is that it brings our attention back to how we construct our bodies and how we know our bodies by moving around in space. And it also, I think, says something about natural environments and who their rightful inhabitants are. What it means to author in this medium is completely different. It means creating a context, which might include scenery, characters, sounds, in which other people can author their own experiences. It's completely indirect. It's authoring by Aikido. And it's no longer the case that the artist controls the shape of the whole thing when it's done. And in fact, it's our goal that the converse be true, that the shape of the whole be the artifact of the people who moved through the world, that the shape of the whole be the artifact of the people who moved through the world.
The importance of telepresence or VR is, I think, mostly as a new medium. The number of applications this bundle of technology can apply to is quite amazing. The experience of being in an environment is often referred to as a sense of presence. The intensity of this experience seems to be created by several related factors. One is a sense of immersion in the environment, feeling of being completely surrounded by it. Another is the ability to explore an environment, to move your viewpoint around the space, and to interact with things in it. And third, the experience of an environment is built up from information provided by all our senses at once: sight, sound, touch, taste, and sometimes smell. Telepresence is a medium that enables a feeling of being present in another place or time, but By matching human sensory capabilities as closely as possible, you can provide a sense of being physically present in a remote or synthesized environment. Currently, the most common form of telepresence involves three technologies in combination: very wide-angle stereoscopic displays, instrumented input devices that track gesture and viewpoint, and 3D auditory displays that allow localization of the sound in the virtual space. In the last couple of years, we've been trying to really define what's going on in this new field, and it's really a medium in the sense that it's like painting or sculpture, computers, that it's really communications that's involved with a lot of different applications. We were looking for a kind of overall umbrella term that would encompass both computer-generated environments as well as the remote camera environments that we've been doing as well. So the term telepresence seemed to be a good overall term focusing on this idea of presence, because that's really what we're after, to give some sense of presence in a synthesized or remote environment. Virtual environments tend to be more the computer-generated. Remote presence tends to involve remote cameras, and now we're actually combining them and making these kind of hybrid environments.
They'll become quicker?
This piece menagerie is something that we've developed over the last year. It's a fairly simple virtual environment, virtual experience on first looking at it, but our intent has been really to focus on trying to populate the virtual space. Most of the virtual worlds you see these days are very simple 3D databases. Kind of architectural room or some space that you can get in and explore. There's not a lot going on in there. There's not much you can do past a couple minutes exploration. Our aim here was to populate this space with creatures that had very simple behaviors and knew about each other as well as you, the user, while you're in there. Okay, when you do get involved, you can chase these guys. They move around. In some cases, they chase you. There's 3D sound so that you can actually hear these guys behind you coming up. If you turn the boom, the viewer, then you'll see the creature actually standing behind you. The birds flock around your head. These bees kind of come up and get right around your ears. And Michael Gerard and Susan Amkraut, who are the artists who designed this system, this particular world, specialize in animal motion. So another focus has been on very natural two-legged and four-legged motion and the flocking behavior of the birds. So it's really, again, a very simple thing, but the algorithms underneath it are very complicated in making it a very smooth kind of interactive experience. The direction has been to make a very high-quality virtual experience where you get in there and you kind of lose yourself. I mean, you really participate in it. So far, a lot of the VR systems have been very low resolution. As I say, not much going on in there. Our attempt here has been to make a very high-quality, very compelling, very immersive experience. The involvement of arts and artists in this technology, this medium, is absolutely critical. A lot of us have worked in this area trying to make images that you can get inside of and interact with, sort of interactive environments for a long time. It's really the artists, I think, who push the edges of technology. And in this case, we're setting up a system now with a fairly stable platform and authoring tools where we can bring artists in to specifically design new worlds and new kinds of experiences. We've been playing around with the technology for a long time, but not a lot of people have thought about what you really do with it, what the technology is good for. So in focusing more on the content, we bring in the artists who are really specialized in that and have all kinds of things to contribute. It's an interesting collaboration because working with artists, we start learning about how we have to sort of improve the tools we have. And in the next maybe 5-10 years, we'll build a tool set where it'll be a lot easier for people to come in and just generate new kinds of experiences and new worlds. In the near future, probably the next biggest thing we'll see are these kinds of systems will become networked together. That is, we can have a server, a computer system that holds the virtual world in one location, and over some of the new network technology and ISDN communications technology, we can start having users log into that remote server and share that virtual space. One of the things in a little bit farther term involves a kind of see-through display. What we've been doing now is almost always enclosed. That is, we're dealing with a completely synthetic environment. We're starting to develop capabilities now to superimpose the computer graphic environment onto the real world. So if you can imagine an application where a computer-generated character like Roger Rabbit could actually appear to be in the same environment with you, then we're looking at a whole new kind of development for entertainment, for learning environments, guides through new kinds of worlds that you're exploring, and things like that are pretty exciting.